The West Midlands is a remarkable region. Birmingham is a remarkable city. It was the birthplace of local government, it was the birthplace of municipal enterprise, it was the great industrial heartland of Britain, but also powerful, vibrant communities. And what we're seeing now is all of that coming together with people resisting what's happening and fighting back.
Birmingham City Council is quite an amazing organisation. People don't really realise what council workers do. I think sometimes they think that we sit in offices and we're kind of public servants. No, we're not. Half the workforce in Birmingham City Council are manual workers. They are people that work every day out in the community providing a whole range of services in museums and in libraries and in parks and in nurseries looking after our children. We have people that do just about everything, and so they're really important to our community. They glue our community together.
If you look at the West Midlands economy, over half of it is accounted for by manufacturing, retail, construction, business services. Those were the sectors that were most impacted by the recession, which is why we took a really big hit in the West Midlands. Go back to the Industrial Revolution, Birmingham was seen as the workshop of the world. There were 1,000 trades in Birmingham. There's a kind of great creativity, ideas were exchanged from different sectors.
Originally I'm from Walsall, which is one of the big towns in what's called the Black Country. In the West Midlands. This area was known as a manufacturing heartland of the UK, and really this area was the area that really helped to drive the British economy for hundreds of years.
From the mid-1960s through to the start of the 80s, there were around 370,000 manufacturing job losses in the West Midlands, which had a profound impact on the economy here. We then went into the 1980s recession, further loss of manufacturing jobs. We've never really recovered from that. We've got a very long-term structural problem in the West Midlands in terms of poor investment, poor productivity growth, a poor track record on research and development. We've had to diversify the economy. So we've seen, for example, in Birmingham, the growth in the service sector. But a big part of that as well was the creation of public sector jobs, especially from 2000 onwards, with investment by the government in health and education and in other public services. And that was a key area, actually, of generating jobs in Birmingham.
One of the things that all of that kind of industrial revolution did was that it created community. We helped to build a whole kind of ethos about the importance of local government and about the state providing support for working class people.
If you look back in history, the NHS was formed just after the Second World War when the country's debts dwarfed the current debts, and on the back of that the country built the NHS. It has been absolutely the shining crown jewel of public service since. There isn't anybody in this country that doesn't value it.
Right now, breaking news. Crisis on Wall Street.
Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley have effectively given up their investment bank status.
Every market open is in the red.
HBOS shares plunged and investors began withdrawing their savings.
Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. The hunt is now on which banks have been exposed to Lehman.
We're still trying to untangle what actually happened in the financial crisis from 2008 onwards. I think a whole series of factors came together. Partly it was financial deregulation, both in the US and in the UK. Previously, if you went to the bank, when I first went to the bank many years ago to get my mortgage, I begged the bank manager, I got a fairly small mortgage, had to put down a big deposit. That mortgage stayed with the bank. Now the banks, in their cleverness, what they did to be able to lend to more and more risky people was starting to syndicate that debt. So they would salami slice those mortgages into millions of little pieces. And we got to the point where banks didn't know which other banks had got the bad debt and who were exposed. So they stopped lending to each other. And that's when the credit crisis came in. Banks stopped lending to each other and they stopped lending to the kind of the real world.
And on Monday, Britain's government announced a second multi-billion-pound bailout for its banks. Chancellor Alistair Darling said it was essential to get banks lending again.
When this all unfolded, people said, well, this is a financial crisis. It's going to have most impact on, say, the City of London, because that's where the financial base is. It didn't, actually.
The West Midlands was the hardest hit by the recession, and we were starting from a base of being pretty low anyway because of that 30 years of economic decline. And the worst thing about all of this is we're the ones who had to pay the money to bail out the banks, and the people who are expected to pay the price, private sector workers who lost their jobs in their hundreds of thousands in this region, and now public sector workers who are told you have to pay the price.
In every area where we make savings, we must leave no stone unturned in our search for waste, and we must deliver changes necessary to make our public services fit for the modern age. It is a hard road, but it leads to a better future.
I think most recent analysis has suggested that the cuts are pretty regressive, that it will be the poorest in society that will be affected by them. I think, for example, the government could have been much more progressive in terms of having more of a tax on the banking system. They could, I think, pay more than £2.5 billion a year to actually help address some of the damage that they'd caused through their very risky behaviour. And the cuts that are coming through in terms of public services, the danger is that they affect the most vulnerable in society who are dependent on public services.
The Welfare Benefits Service has started off with just one officer and has now got 40 staff. So our officers are responsible for going out and in ensuring that all these vulnerable people and the elderly people are in receipt of the correct benefits so they can have a decent living standard. The spending cuts, I think, are going to affect the vulnerable people of Staffordshire. And when you talk about vulnerable people, you're talking about people with mental health, the learning difficulties. These people will be left more or less to fend for themselves, I feel, and are more susceptible for being financial abuse, vulnerability. I think they'll just slip through the net and be the forgotten people.
Really, it's been the last sort of 18 months, maybe 2 years, that we've seen lots of changes because of cuts to council budgets, and our services have started to disappear, and we've been having big campaigns to try and save them. I started work as a day centre officer in a day centre for adults with learning disabilities. Did that for 19 years, and then last year we lost the battle to save my day centre. It was closed by the council, and the people that use the service were all moved to other services.
And people are very, very concerned about their jobs and the services that we all provide. I'll hand you over to Caroline Johnson, who's going to present the first motion.
The huge proposed cuts to the public sector are not just about the economy. They're about changing the face of our public services forever.
We've produced newsletters, we've held meetings in hundreds of workplaces with our members, and they've told us how angry they are about this, but they've also told us how this would devastate their lives, absolutely devastate their lives. We will have people losing their homes because of these proposals.
I remember the Thatcher years, and I think people have short memories. You have to get out and go on these marches. I'm not afraid to say it, but I support Unison.
We had over 3,500 of our members come together, and they voted unanimously to strike against the proposals. We're going to fight the council all the way. We're not going to allow them to do this to our members, and our members are very determined.
All those in favour of the motion, please show.
When Labour came in 97, they were left with a position where they had a very low skills base in this region, a massive change in what the workforce looked like, and the impact that that had in terms of education achievement, skills levels and so on. And now we're in a position where the one service, the one area of the economy that's provided support for people as they've moved through those massive, massive changes is about to be devastated.
When I first started with Connections, it was quite new, and so a lot of people didn't really know the sort of things that we did and the sort of things that we could help them with. And that didn't just include the young people, that included parents and teachers and schools. And so it was a case of building this relationship. As the years went on, so these people saw the effect of what going into school did, of what having the drop-in centres did, of what, you know, helping these young people, what it achieved. And now young people do know. They know where to come if they need help. They come to Connections. We don't just work with a set clientele. We have young people with learning difficulties and disabilities who have got complex needs, people with social problems who've been in trouble with the police, and, you know, they work closely with probation. And so what happens to them young people? And we get them into training providers. We explain, you know, we work with them so that they can go and get a future.
Connections is a service that refers young people who need training or need careers advice to further education colleges. If we were to lose Connections, for example, then obviously these young people have got nowhere to seek that advice. I work with young people, also older people, helping them to gain their qualification in their MVQ, their vocational subject. The people that we deal with are obviously in training to gain a qualification, and if my role didn't exist, quite simply they wouldn't be able to gain the qualification that they're looking for. The staff will still aim to deliver a world-class service. The problem that we've got is that apprenticeships, while they are being funded, the guided learning hours, which is the amount of time you're allowed to spend with students or the amount of time the college will be paid to spend with students, has been dramatically reduced. So it's impossible and it's not sustainable for colleges to still deliver the high-class service that they have done, and inevitably there's got to be a loss of content on the course somewhere if you're going to lose up to 6 months from a course.
All over the country, some of the Connection services has gone. We have to say to the young people that, you know, there's not a lot of jobs out there. And some young people are a bit naive and they, oh no, I'll be fine, I'll get a job, don't worry about that. And we say, actually, it's not that easy because even our jobs are on the line. I mean, only today, you know, a young person, I said, well, the same thing, you know, our jobs could be on the line. And she said, well, who's going to help me? And it was like, whoa. That really gets to me, you know, because I said, well, I don't know. I don't know where they will get a combination of help like that. I mean, young people don't want to go and tell their story to this person, that person, the other person. We find that that's when they cut off. You know, they think, oh, I've had enough, I don't want to tell anybody else. And then that's when you lose them. It's just ridiculous. It really does have an effect on me, in the fact that you could take away something that to me is working. You know, if it isn't broke, don't try and fix it. And that's exactly what they're doing.
I think this government is going to lose a generation to unemployment and lack of training. People are losing an opportunity for guidance and for their futures. I myself, without guidance, wouldn't be where I am today. So how can they expect the next generation to come through without that help and guidance that we've all enjoyed?
Some analysis has suggested that the package of measures we've seen introduced by the government is actually quite regressive. The only kind of progressive element within it was the last measure introduced by Alistair Darling, which was a 50% tax on people earning more than $150,000 a year, and that the rest of the package that we've seen is going to impact most on the poorest areas, for example, of inner city Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Stoke-on-Trent.
Stoke is, on levels, is vulnerable because we haven't got the private sector jobs to pick up those jobs when people do lose them. We just haven't. So, you know, whatever happens with nationally with a double dip recession, you can see Stoke-on-Trent and North Staffordshire slipping into recession if people lose their jobs and the numbers are being threatened. When you've got poverty like we've got in our city, that means the general health is not so good. So cuts in the NHS and cuts in social services and things like that will have an impact on the health of the city as well. I don't think the Condon government particularly care that much about the people of Stoke. They haven't got votes here. That's not politically a heartland that they will care about. So I worry greatly for Stoke-on-Trent.
I think we should be under no illusions about what's happening here. Public services are really the last line of defence that people have, and I think we have to be very, very worried about what would happen if that last line of defence suddenly disappeared. You've got councils that just decide, well, we're just going to get out of the public service business altogether, and what we're going to do is we're just going to sell off the whole council. We'll become a virtual council, and what we'll do is we'll simply buy in services from whoever wants to provide them.
People want their local services to be the best quality, but that isn't what this government's agenda is. This government's agenda is to introduce the market and the private sector into the NHS. The government have sold to the people that this is the way to organise the NHS. What it'll turn it into is just a brand name. They've decided that anybody that's called a manager in the NHS is somehow sitting doing nothing all day. I've seen people in management and admin clerical almost vilified in the press as if they're not contributing. Well, anything the size of the NHS needs back office functions, and ultimately every member of staff is contributing towards patient care at the end of the day. The NHS is facing an ideological shift, which I think is almost a bigger threat than the cuts. Services will be put to tender. Services will be provided by what they call any willing provider. It's a huge risk, and if it goes wrong, it could destroy this NHS that will take 60 years to recover from.
The whole thing about public services is that it's supposed to be about helping people, about giving people a service in terms of what they need. These are not luxuries. Nobody woke up one morning and thought those would be good ideas, so let's just do it. All of those things happened because there was a demand for it, first of all, and the second reason was because working people organised and fought for all of those things to happen. So the whole idea of public services is not about somebody being able to make a big, fast buck off it.
It's given me a very horrible picture of what our city could become if they cut all of this money from our budget, and the massive impact that it will have on the people that live in our city. They want to cut £30 million worth of services to some of the most vulnerable adults in our city with mental health problems, learning disabilities, and the elderly. In the residential homes that they've closed, the service users have been sent to the private sector, and I could tell you some horror stories about the things that are happening to those residents.
The changes I've seen in the care industry, I worked for Birmingham City Council for 20 years roughly, isn't it? Yeah, God, I never thought it was that long. Yeah. I ended my employment in March when the home was closed. It was wonderful because that was regulated. The training was fantastic. And then I went into private care, and that is an absolute nightmare. They say you don't get to love the people you look after, but yes, you do. There's always something there that makes you love them. And without that care, without that love, you can't do that job. When I worked in the public sector, we had regular inspections. We never knew when they were coming, and we were regulated day in, day out. The home that I went to, they had people that hadn't even done an NVQ2 or an NVQ1, doing a 3.5-hour course on medication and giving medication out to people. You can't do that. You need to be trained properly. And I'm not saying that there wasn't any bad practice in the public sector, because there was. And if you did do bad practice, you were disciplined, you were sorted out. In the private sector where I worked, it was brushed under the carpet. And it was, oh, don't worry about it, we'll just not, we never seen that. We didn't do that. That is wrong. That is not how you deal with people's lives.
What they're doing is to cut too far, too deep, too quick. They've not got a strategy for growth, because the best way of dealing with our deficit actually is to grow the economy. Neither are they asking those who caused the crisis, the bankers, to pay a fair share, to bear the burden, because those with the biggest shoulders should bear the burden. Instead, what they're doing is to turn to the victims of the bankers and say, you pay the price, and that's absolutely wrong.
I think many economists agree that the government has to get the deficit down. Even the Labour Party is saying that. But the big issue is about the speed at which you do it and the depth at which you make cuts. If you do it too quickly, then I fear that really you're not providing any sort of stimulus for growth in the economy. So what's really important for getting the deficit down, in my view, is growth. If we cut too quickly, we don't deliver growth, we don't deliver tax revenue, and actually the job will be much harder than it would be if we'd taken a more cautious approach.
It's usual for police forces to go through reorganisation programmes on a fairly regular basis due to a change of leadership politically and with new chief constables, and that's something that we're all used to dealing with. But we've seen the change in the political landscape over those times as well, with different shades of government. But at the moment, this is the biggest and most difficult change we've ever faced. We're facing cuts to the budgets for essential parts of our service, but as a result of that, we're also losing almost a third of our police staff workforce. Fingerprint experts, the people that take the 999 calls, all of these people do a valuable job in assisting the police officers, and without the jobs that our members do, the service will fail. It's not certain whether or not we'll achieve a voluntary package for the future. It's going to be, I think, a round of compulsory redundancies which will severely affect not just the lives of those people who will lose their jobs, but also the safety and security of the public of the West Midlands.
The idea that you cut 1,200 police officers and then you say to local communities, arrest your own criminals, or that you have vigilante justice, it's a complete nonsense. What you need is that combination of police officers, police community support officers, working in partnership with the community. Now, the community don't want to fight crime and prevent antisocial behaviour by themselves, they want to work with the police.
It'll be about the survival of the fittest eventually. If you can't pay, you don't get it. And that's the direction that this government wants to work in. They think this is it, this is our chance to change the way that it all looks. Here's an opportunity to make a load of money out of the public sector, and you know what? We're going to do it all at once. And they come up with this nonsense thing that they're calling the big society, which is really just a return to the me, myself, I society of Thatcher.
The change we need in our country is recognising we'll only really make things better when we all come together, when we all work together, when we all join together, when we work out that we're all in this together. That's the change that our country needs. It's the big society.
To tell you the truth, I find it extremely difficult to listen to what David Cameron has to say, because David Cameron doesn't come from the background that I deal with. I deal with young people and their parents and myself. You know, we working class background. We haven't had all the, you know, the private schooling and things like that. So I find it really hard to take him in a realistic view, because he's not realistic.
You're having the cuts in the public sector, which are supposed to be picked up by the big society, and the big society is in danger of fragmenting in front of our very eyes for lack of funding. I mean, voluntary sector plays a very important role, but it complements the state. It's not an alternative to it.
The big society, if you were led to believe, it means that everybody's in it together, everybody's treated fairly, when in reality there are a lot of very low paid workers, predominantly women, and it's those that are going to lose their jobs, which will have a knock-on effect on their own families.
If you're going to reduce the deficit, and if, as we're told, we're all in it together, then you don't do it by cutting public services and benefits, which we know will disproportionately affect women, children, people living in poverty. Women are the main providers and also users of welfare services. They provide welfare both for the state, for the voluntary sector, but also in the home, and they use the services often on behalf of their families. They act as the managers of poverty. So if you're going to have cuts in public spending, particularly in the welfare state, it's very difficult to see how they're not going to adversely affect women in their role as mothers and carers. There's a real danger that we're going to go many steps backwards in terms of women's position in society.
There's so much evidence that it's the priorities of this government that are the problem, not the fact that we have a deficit. Actually, just in tax evasion and tax avoidance, we could save £120 billion, which is 3/4 of the deficit. It's our public money, these are our public services, and they're making decisions that will affect these public services forever.
I think there are some big risks around the government's current strategy, and I think even Richard Lambert at the CBI has said, look, where's the growth strategy? And the IFS saying the government actually needs a plan B, and that means a plan actually around growth and creating jobs, and cutting the deficit isn't enough.
I've got real fears about the longer term impact of this. I mean, it's important about the jobs for our members, because after all, they're the people who make our country work. But without those people being properly resourced, being properly rewarded for what they do, you could easily run into, well, if you're in a richer area, then you get the service. If you're in a poor area, then you simply don't. And that just maintains, in fact, deepens the divide between people in this country.
Neither the Conservative Party or the Liberal Democrat Party went to the people of Britain last May and said, vote us in and we will cut local government spending by 27%. We need a great movement that comes together to say, no, no. You weren't elected on the basis of a mandate to destroy the big society that they pretend they want to build. We value our services, we value our public servants. We're going to stand together and defend them.
This is not just a battle against cuts now. This is not just a battle for jobs. This is a battle for the soul of the country. Because if we're not careful, the centre of political gravity will shift. And in 5-10 years' time, spending on public services will be seen as a dirty word. If we don't win this ideological argument, the country will lose this forever. And it will be a country of the individual.
Some members think that they're not the union. You know, there's this idea that we're not the union. The union is something over there, it's some body that's separate from us. And I think it's really important that we get the message across. We're all the union. Every single one of us are the union.
We have to fight very, very hard. We have to join up with other organisations in the community, talk to other unions, campaign and raise awareness of the detrimental effects of the cuts.
I've attended rallies. I continue to write to and lobby my local MPs and councillors, and I think the most important thing is that we need to make our voices heard and make sure that we don't just take these cuts lying down.
I will do whatever I can, because at least then, if it comes about that they say, right, well, sorry Michelle, but you're one of them that have got to go, then I know I have done everything I could. Because if I haven't done anything, then I can't moan. But if I've done my best, then I can shout and make a big fuss, you know.
We stand together as one. My whole experience is that if you don't fight, you lose. But if you do fight, you can win important victories.
When we organise together, we can actually change minds, we can change hearts, and we can certainly change governments.
We are a powerful force to be reckoned with when we actually stand up and say enough is enough.
It's not theirs, it's our services. We have absolutely every right as working people to stand up and say no more. We have to do that, workers with the people who rely on those services. I think if we do that, I genuinely believe that we have a strong chance of winning.